individual needs. So let's get started. So what we'll do is we'll just angle it down so that we're able to see her body, and then I'll go through those steps that I would take. And so in terms of having a client, I generally like to have them up on the table before I get started. Basically, that's going to give you just a more accurate view of the subcutaneous stuff that they're dealing with, because when you're standing up, you tend to be sucking it a little bit. You're not falling the way you might when you're laying down, and so that's why I like to have them lay down first, obviously having asked them what area they want to focus on. And so for this client, she's asked to focus on the stomach area, the area of the abdomen. And so then what I'll do is I'll just gently lift up so that we can see what we're working with. So you can see here, what I always do is I'll do what I call the grip test. And so you always want to make sure that there's going to be enough subcutaneous fat that you're able to hold on to so that you're able to have an effective slimming. So that's step number one. So in terms of a consultation, what I would do, again, first I would ask them which area they're looking to focus on. If they're looking to focus on more than one area, you want to ask them which is their bigger problem area, because you want to always focus on a 5-pack in sequence before they move on to the next area. So for the abdomen, what I do is I'll do a grip test. And so you can see here that I am able to get a fairly good grip on this area. So if you guys want to just do a little test with me, if you try to grip the area of your forearm, you can see that it's really hard to get a real grip of anything. So you guys can do this at home as well, just to get an idea of what would not be a slimming area. Here, we know that we can slim. So the next step that I would take is to measure the client. So you always want to measure the client lying down. It's going to be most accurate. It's also going to help you to be the most consistent. I always measure around the belly button because the belly button doesn't move, so we can't cheat there. So what I'll do is I'll just ask the client that they lift up and around. I'll go ahead and pull this around. And so I'll just have the client take a deep breath in, deep breath out. And so she measures about 39 inches around. And so from that measurement, you then know that you're going to focus exclusively on the front. And so the way that you do that, like I said, so with the slimming, obviously there's multiple ways that you could orient. Generally, I would say for women, if they're under 35 inches around, I typically tend to do front and back because they don't need as much time on each side. If they're more than 35 inches around, generally I would recommend focusing on one side versus the other, just depending on how their body type is. So what we're going to do here is we're going to split the session right down the middle of the stomach. And so what we'll do is we'll do 2 minutes of heat to the left of the belly button. We'll do a nice quadrant of 6 minutes of cold here, and then we will still get into these side areas as well. So we'll start on this right side. Then what I'll do is after 14 minutes here, I'll have her flip around so that I'll have nice leverage to address this side as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. In terms of steps to prepare the client for a slimming session, the first thing you always want to do is just wipe down the area with a baby wipe. We use Amazon sensitive baby wipes. They're easy to buy in bulk. They're really great for this. And literally, you're just going to gently wipe off the surface that you're going to be dealing with. So I like to wipe off the entire surface just so that it's clean, it's good to go, so that when she flips over, I don't have to do this step again. And essentially, we're just getting off any lotions, any natural oils, any sweat, so that we have a clean surface to work with. So once that's done, the next step that you're going to take is you're either going to tuck in a paper towel or you can use just a regular towel. You're going to tuck this into their waistband, so it's going to serve a twofold function. A, it's going to protect their clothing from the gel. The gel gets on the clothes. It's not the biggest deal. It's a water-based gel, so it won't damage clothing, but obviously it's not nice to get it on the clothes regardless. So we'll tuck in the towel here. Also, what that's going to help you do is pull down that waistband and get a nice tension here so we're able to reach those areas that we really need to address. So now, once we've done that, once we've wiped off the surface, we're ready to start. And so what you'll do is you're going to take that nice full pump of gel in your non-dominant hand. So the gel should look about that much. So it is quite a lot of gel, but just keep in mind that as we heat the area, the gel is going to thin out, and you can never have too much gel. So especially when we start talking about how to make sure the wand is cooling down appropriately, gel is going to be essential. So you've got the gel in your non-dominant hand. The wand should always be in your dominant hand. Then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and hit play on the slimming sequence. So of course, because we're doing her abdomen, we're going to use body slimming on the 2.0. We're going to go ahead and hit play, and we can get started. And so what we'll do, as always, we deposit the gel and use the wand to glide it. And so because I've said that I'm going to be doing just the front, we're really just focusing to the right of the belly button. So you can see here that I'm slowly applying slight pressure, but nowhere near the amount of pressure you would apply on the Cool sequence. Essentially, like you guys know, the intention with this is to expand the fat cells and bring them closer to the surface, so that once we switch over to the cold and the manual manipulation that comes with that, it'll be much easier to shrink those cells into apoptosis. And so you can see I'm following with this left hand. It's almost like an oven mitt, and it's helping to enhance the circulation. It's essentially acting as an extension of the heat of the wand. And so you can see I'm really sticking to a localized area, so you don't need to heat up anything other than what you're going to end up using the cold on. And so I've already determined that my quadrants are quite small, and we'll go through those again as soon as this timer runs out on the heat. And I'm really using her bones to guide me. So I'm not going up and over her ribs. I'm making sure I'm staying right under her ribs, and I'm making sure I'm not going up and over her hip bones either, because that can be really uncomfortable, but also just unnecessary in terms of the heat component. So we have about another 27 seconds here. So the most essential part of a slimming, as you can see, is making sure that you keep the wand flush to their skin for the entire session. I can't stress that enough. The one thing you do want to make sure you're not doing, however, is keeping the wand static. So that is a common misconception about how to make the wand colder on a cold sequence. You never want to leave the wand static on an area, whether it's in the heat or the cold sequence, because that can just be potentially damaging to nerve endings in the skin. You just don't want to have that potential for any kind of burn or discomfort. So you can see now we've switched over to cold. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a big pump of gel, again, in our non-dominant hand. And then now that we are on the cold sequence, we can just set that down. And so like I said, we're going to start off in this small quadrant here. So I'll show you. It's about that big what we're going to be dealing with. So here, 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 here. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sorry, love, it's going to be a little bit of pressure. And so you guys can see there's a couple metaphors that I like to use for slimming. The most useful one is it's like popping pimples. I know it's gross, but it's just the most useful metaphor that I can give you, because that's really what the motion should look like. You're scooping under and lifting up. Again, the most essential part of a slimming session is that you're keeping the wand flush to their skin the entire session. So of course you're at points going to have to reapply gel, at which point you would want to just remove the wand briefly so that you can reapply gel without keeping it static. But also another essential component is that you're applying equal pressure with your left and right hand. And also making sure that you're providing enough tension of the fat. Also, you're really going to need to use your histogram as a checkpoint to make sure that you're doing the sessions properly. And so essentially what that means is, you guys know on the 2.0 in the bottom left-hand part of the screen, there's a yellow line and a histogram that's going to show you what the actual temperature of the applicator is. In order to have an effective slimming session, the applicator must remain below 4 degrees, ideally under 2 degrees, but effective temperature range is under 4 degrees for the entirety of the session. So if you look over and you're above 4 degrees, the slimming is not going to be effective. If you look over and you're having trouble coming below 4 degrees, you'll still have effectiveness, but it's not going to be as effective as it could be. And so I'll look over there. My temperature applicator at the moment is at 0.5, so that's perfect. Ideally, you want it to hover in the +2 to -2 range for the duration of the session. And in doing that, so ways in which you can cool down the wand if you're having trouble are to make sure you're going very slowly. So you can see I'm almost going painstakingly slow. So when you're first starting out, because of the intensity of the manual manipulation technique, it is very understandable that you would want to go a little bit faster. But what I would give you guys a tip in that sense is to just use your body weight. So just lean into the gesture. Instead of going faster, just use more of your body weight so you take some of that pressure off of your shoulders. Another thing is to always make sure that they've got enough gel so that the wand is gliding properly and therefore able to cool down. And so what you'll start to see is that when she becomes tacky to the touch, so sticky, what we would do is we would quickly come over, take a full pump of gel, set it back down, and continue. So you never want the client to be tacky to the touch. They always want to be gliding, glistening, and have a fairly thick layer of gel on the surface of the skin. And you can see I'm really, really remaining to a fairly small area. Again, that's going to make it essential because that's going to make it more effective. Because if I were to move the wand to an area that I hadn't really been focusing on, her body heat would be much different in that area, which would then disrupt the wand's temperature. So keeping to that localized area is going to be really essential to getting good results here. So we've got about another 1.5 minutes left of this quadrant before moving on to the side area. Another really great metaphor that I recently heard is that with your wand hand, so another issue I oftentimes see is that people are not putting enough pressure with their wand hand. So you are really using the edge of that wand to dig and scoop. And you can see that when I'm building this tension, I'm not meeting my fingers. So that's another common mistake, is that people will smooth over these hills that they're building. But if you think about it, we're not actually trying to cool down the skin, but instead what we're working with is the subcutaneous fat that's under the skin surface. So subcutaneous meaning under the skin. And so you really don't need to smooth that skin over. Instead, we're just trying to dig and cool underneath. So the good metaphor I heard the other day was your right hand is acting as if you're trying to scoop really hard ice cream. So think of the metaphors of popping pimples and scooping really hard ice cream. So it's that kind of intensity of motion, the digging and the lifting. And so now we're down to 6 minutes. And so what I'll do is I'll quickly get another pump of gel. And when you're getting that next pump of gel, you never want to set the wand down into the acrylic holder. The reason behind that being that can easily damage the holder. And when you come to this side, it's going to be a little harder for you guys to see on this side, but you can really use the natural curve of their body to lift up and then push into the wand. So you can see I'm really using her rib cage here with my hands to block and protect. So I'm protecting her bone while also getting really good leverage so that I'm able to have more effective results here. It's the same premise. So the way you do the back sides or the front sides, again, if we're focusing only on the abdomen, is very similar to the way that you're going to do the thighs. And so what we'll do is after we finish this full session, at the end of the webinar, I'm going to be showing you how to apply this technique to various other parts of the body as well. And again, always checking your histogram. So I'm at -1 right now, so I know My speed is good. I know my intensity, my pressure are good. I know that I'm sticking to a localized area. I've got about 4 minutes left here before I'll have her flip over and we'll start on the other side. And so as I said before, when you're consulting with a client, I would say that if you're ever, for example, if you ever encounter a client that is teetering sort of on the edge of where you would only focus on one side versus the other, so meaning they're at 35 inches or more, if they're teetering on the edge and you're not sure, I always recommend focusing on one side versus both. The reason behind that is that if you're unsure, generally it means that one side is going to be much more effective because there's a bit more mass there that you would be dealing with. And the thing is with treating one side is that I've seen in 5 packs, generally sometimes what will happen is that if someone starts out treating just one side, ultimately after about 3 sessions or so, sometimes some people will come to a measurement where they'll be able to finish out the 5-pack doing both sides. So it really just does depend on the person's body type, which is why we always recommend consulting each client individually in terms of how you're going to determine the location of treatment. I'm going to add a bit more gel to her here. So again, really using that curve of the edge of her body. So however you have to do to get this tension that you're seeing here, that's what you just have to do to get an effective result. We've got about 1 minute and 45 seconds to go. I'm checking my histogram. I'm at -1.5, so I know speed is good. The results are going to be effective for her. Again, in terms of aftercare, you want to be telling clients these things as they're on the table. For before care, ideally, of course, you would tell them before. And so for aftercare, you want to make sure that they don't eat any sugar for the next 2 hours. So any refined sugars, any natural sugars, no carbs, no alcohol. The reason behind that is that sugar feeds fat cells, and we don't want to feed anything that we're trying to shrink and have apoptosis. They also should be drinking at least 1.5 liters of water every single day for the next 2 weeks while they're draining. They may notice that they have a little bit of darker urine, they're just urinating more frequently, totally normal, just lymphatic interaction. We're just about done here. We've got about 40 seconds to go. So after the cold, so you'll see that once I'm finished, what I'll do is I'll just take a baby wipe. I'll gently just wipe off the surface of the head before setting it down in the holder. And then what I'll do is I'll do the essential 3rd step to the 3-phase thermal shock, which is going to be the massage. Perfect. So I'll just take baby wipe, like I said. I'm just going to wipe off the wand really roughly, set it back down. And then what I'll do with the gel still on her, just to make it a bit more comfortable, so I'm just going to gently massage the area. So what I'll do is I'll massage from side to side. So basically what this is going to do, it's going to bring circulation back to the area for her, but it's also going to help to break down the fat layers that we were dealing with. So generally I do this for about 90 seconds until they are a little bit warmer to the touch. So you can see on this side of her, she's going to feel a little bit cooler still because that was the most recent side that we were dealing with. So I'll just continue to massage the area. You can also do the lifting motion, or again, from side to side.
Delaney, we're getting a lot of great questions.
Okay,
we will wait till you finish up the massage and then
sounds good.
Start jumping in with questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the other side is going to literally be exactly the same, so happy to answer questions while we go over that. So what we'll do at the end of this, again, you can see I'm just wiping off the excess gel for her. And because we're still going to be treating the stomach, I'll have her keep this towel in while she flops over. So what I'll have you do that is I'll just have you flip over so that your head is on the other side. I'll move this a little bit well. And then I'll have you sit a little bit perfect. You might have to realign it. Perfect. All right, awesome. And so essentially I'm going to do the same thing that I just did on this side. I'm going to focus on this side. So I'm happy to take any questions while we get started on that.
Okay, so why is this session exactly 28 minutes long?
So the session is exactly 28 minutes because we have 2 minutes of heat, 12 minutes of cold, and then on the second half of whatever area we're treating, we would do 2 minutes of heat and 12 minutes of cold. It's obviously going to be a little bit longer than 28 minutes because of the initial consultation as well as the massage afterwards. But generally we say 28 minutes of actual treatment time with the machine. Reasoning being that's just from the studies that they've done in France, that's the most effective in terms of treatment without being either redundant or just too much intensity of cold for the client.
Great. And Delaney, we're hanging on everything you say, but the more, the louder you can speak, the better. Some folks are in rooms that you're projecting.
Got it. No worries.
Okay. And then another question from Danielle here. You mentioned focusing on one side. Do you mean by that you focus switching for the front and back of said side?
So I mean, when I say focus on one side, what I mean is that instead of doing, for this client, instead of doing front for 14 minutes and then having her flip over and doing the back for 14 minutes, instead what we're doing is we're doing 14 minutes to the right of the belly button, 14 minutes to the left. So we're still breaking down into the 6-minute quadrants, but for some people it's going to just be more helpful to focus most of that time in a more localized area instead of breaking it up to front and back, if that makes sense.
And everybody, if that doesn't answer your question, you can ping in the chat group and we'll, kind of come back to that one. Next question, in a situation where the skin gets a little irritated and puffy after the treatment, how do you handle that conversation with the clients when they are expecting to see inches lost? Best way to prevent this?
So in terms of an issue like that, generally they would still see inches lost. The reason that happens is some people just have a little bit more sensitive skin. They get a little bit more irritated. I know for me personally, I actually experienced this. So I know exactly what you're talking about. It essentially looks like hives. Those should dissipate within, I would say, like max 2 hours. And they should still be seeing inches lost. So the rash on the surface of the skin shouldn't affect the effectiveness of the results as long as we're making sure that the technique is sound. So one thing that might be affecting that, if that's happening to your clients very frequently, is if you're not adding enough gel. And so what I would recommend for you guys to try is just to make sure you're always adding a nice thick layer of gel, which is going to act as a barrier, which should hopefully help to avoid some of those more harsh rashes.
Exactly, because one of the things for the redness is the more gel you're adding, the less friction there is on the skin. So if you're not adding gel, it'll be a 1-2 punch for customers that experience irritation.
Exactly.
Okay. Great. And is it best to keep rotating the wand to the same spot or to rotate around different sides of the area we are working on?
So I think I understand the question. So in terms of, I think what you mean, and when I get to the cold, it's going to be a little bit more clear for you guys, I think, is it better on the cold sequence to do the same stroke over and over again versus different strokes subtly in the same area? So I would say it's generally best to make sure that you're subtly moving. So again, we never want to stay static, but we also don't want to go over the same stroke over and over again, because the same stroke over and over again is only going to be targeting one part of the localized area. So you'll see when I start to do the cold that even though it looks like I'm staying relatively in the same spot, I'm actually moving very, very subtly.
Okay, perfect. Next question, and I know we have experienced this. For people whose skin temperature runs hot, so this could be menopausal women in areas that the temperature is hot. I know we deal with this in Miami. How do you get to the optimal temperature, Delaney, in those kind of cases?
So in those cases, I would really recommend that we are going really, really slow. It's also super essential that the clients are coming in to us with as even a body temperature as possible. So not working out, just making sure they're not doing any kind of sauna or hot yoga beforehand. Another way to just address that is sometimes in those areas, if you do find that it's really hard to cool clients down, it might be that you do have to kind of forego that 35-inch rule, and you might have to spend more time on a smaller person to really get that temp down, because as we know, the temperature is what's actually giving us that effective result.
Great, thank you. And this is something we've gotten a few times in the last couple of days. Can you perform over a lipoma? And if you can, could it decrease the size of the lipoma or fatty deposit?
So I actually spoke with France about this morning. Unfortunately, lipomas, we do not treat out of precaution. The reason being is that we just haven't seen any kind of effective results for lipomas via CRYOSKIN, and we would just rather not put that in danger. So
great. And what is the age of someone that can receive a treatment? I assume this is probably the youngest age, but we can also answer the full range.
Absolutely, yeah. So in terms of youngest age, generally we say 15. It might vary for you guys based on your practice and your clientele. It really is just a personal preference for you guys. I would say no younger than 15. That's kind of the official stance we have. But in terms of the oldest age, there is really no limit as long as they have none of the contraindications. So always make sure that on the lower end of the spectrum as well as on the older end of the spectrum, you're really making sure none of those contraindications are existing.
Great. Speaking of contraindications, how long after liposuction or gastric bypass should we wait to do a treatment?
So for those two surgeries, because they are quite invasive, we generally say 6 months. However, another question actually we've been getting fairly frequently in the past weeks is Coolsculpting. So how long do you have to wait between Coolsculpting and CRYOSKIN? And we recommend a minimum of a month to wait for that.
Great. How's the session going there, Delaney?
It's going really well. Yeah, so I'm seeing here that she's down to 1 Celsius, which is really good. It's still in our target range. But really, again, you can see that even though I'm moving really subtly, I'm getting different strokes. And a lot of that is using this left hand to make sure that you're really gathering different pieces each time. But again, really sticking in that localized area. It is actually pretty hot in New York here. So we are having a little bit of a harder time cooling her down to where we normally would be. But having said that, she's at 0 degrees Celsius, well underneath +4, so we still should see some really great results today.
Great follow-up question on Coolsculpting. Is that waiting a month for the same area or any area? And I would add on the clarification if we're talking slimming or toning.
So for the Coolsculpting, we're talking about toning. Generally, it would be for any area. The reason being is because it is still processing things in your system, so you don't want to overload it too much. However, I can also clarify that with France because I believe that the specific question was addressing in the same area, so we can check on that and we'll get back to you guys in a later email.
And it's for toning or slimming?
Slimming.
Slimming,
Exclusively,
sorry. Yeah,
yes.
slimming. Okay. Great question. And I'm encouraging the chat, if anybody has additional questions, go ahead and ask them. We've got another one. Okay, good overall question.
Mm-hmm.
What type of overall body compositions and type are an appropriate client for this, i.e. upper and lower limits for best results?
Ooh.
I know this is something that in some of our top retailers, they're very choosy on who they actually choose to treat.
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. Obviously, determining the best candidates is what's going to help us get the best results from the sessions. And so in terms of a max, generally we say max 35 BMI. The BMI scale is a little tricky because it tends to not take into account muscle mass, weight from muscle. And so generally, you're going to pretty much have to eyeball it. Absolutely, definitely, this treatment is not going to help anybody who is obese. So in those circumstances, we generally would have to, unfortunately, turn them away for the slimming session. They could still, however, do a double chin or a toning. So there is really no circumstance where you would have to turn someone away altogether. And I don't know who asked that question was in on the pinch of the forearm. It's kind of a pinch test. But in terms of the lower end of the spectrum, if someone comes into you and they do have not enough fat to grip, again, we don't have to turn them away entirely from the machine, but we would turn them away from slimming because the slimming just wouldn't be effective for people who don't have a lot of subcutaneous fat that they're dealing with.
Right. And how would you describe, Delaney, the difference between Coolsculpting and CRYOSKIN?
Yes, so definitely a lot of differences. Obviously, in our sort of talking with clients, we really want to highlight our strengths versus Coolsculpting's weaknesses. But just in chatting with you guys, just so you guys are aware of the difference in the technologies, essentially what Coolsculpting is doing is it's taking an area and it's using a suction component, so it is much more invasive than the CRYOSKIN. It's also much more painful. It's less cost effective. So, for example, I think a leg is about $4,000. It takes about 4 to 8 months to see results from it, and I would say about 80% of our clients are former Coolsculpting clients who weren't happy with their results. So in terms of scientifically the different mechanisms involved, Coolsculpting actually produces, using the liposuction, not the liposuction, but it is a suction component that's added to the skin. Essentially what that does is it kills the fat cells in that area so that no fat can ever grow back. The problem being there is that fatty deposits can then build in separate areas where they wouldn't normally be. Whereas obviously CRYOSKIN is much less invasive. It requires maintenance, but you also see results much more quickly. So you see results at the end of the first session, and then you see results at each checkpoint each 2 weeks throughout the 5-pack.
One of the other things we've noted is you can do contouring sculpting. So the Coolsculpting really is only on that certain bulge areas, whereas with the wand you can get much more of a technique and like that kind of contoured look.
A little bit closer to me. Perfect. Yes, and so normally you would like to have a table that you can adjust or at least have a step stool for your shorter practitioners. It's generally easiest if they can have some good leverage over the client.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. How important is it to spread the wand all over the area being treated versus just over a specific smaller area over and over again?
So you can see that, I'm just gonna add some more gel, sorry for the interlude. So you can see that when I am doing it, I'm not spreading it very far. It's literally the same area, just different strokes. And so the point of that is that you really want to make sure that you're cooling all of the subcutaneous fat in that localized area, which is going to give you a more even effect.
Great. And okay. Can you ever treat multiple body parts in the same day?
In terms of slimming, absolutely not. Yeah, so that is absolutely contraindicated. The reason being is that every time you're doing a slimming session, you're releasing fat cells to be broken down and pass through the lymphatic system. So adding any more cells and cellular debris to the system than we do in one slimming session is just going to be an overload. It's also really just going to hinder the effectiveness of the results. So maximum one slimming session for 14 days. So that is super important. A really good question.
One of the other tips that's coming in is to keep the gel as close as possible so you don't have to remove the wand as you're adding more gel. So as you're setting up the room, maybe you can talk about some of the
absolutely. So another thing you can do as well is when you are adding more gel, you can just continue to move the wand in the area. So that's generally something that I'll recommend to people, because the problem being that what I have seen is that sometimes people will just leave the wand flat, and that obviously we never want to have it static. As long as you're moving the wand, it's fine to leave it on the skin.
There's a question about Raynaud's. If somebody only is affected with that in one or two fingers, why would we say that they cannot receive the treatment?
Well, so generally we say severe Raynaud's. So if they're just affected in a localized area, then they wouldn't be under that category. Yep, and we're at -2, so we're at a great temperature right now. We're just about done. We've got about 1 minute and 30 seconds to go.
Okay, question. How low are you getting the temperature before you go to the next area? Are you getting it to -8?
So in terms of how low the temperature is going, generally it's going to hit anywhere between -4 and -8. Generally, I like to see it hit between -4 and -6 before I'll move on to the next area.
Okay, a good question on the measurements of 35 inches, whether it applies to men and women. So maybe you can talk about
really good question. So it does not. So as of now, we don't have a very steadfast measurement when it comes to men. Reason being is that they just tend to be broader, just taller, bigger build than women. And so generally with men, you are going to have to eyeball it, although I definitely recommend if they are on the larger scale that you would just focus on their abdomen only. Generally, men aren't going to have as much of an issue with the love handles as women tend to have. So yeah, I would say if they do have a minimal amount of body fat, you can do front and back if they are more evenly distributed and they're smaller in build. But if they are larger, I tend to focus exclusively on the abdomen.
Okay, great. And is hydration essential after and between appointments, since your body is going to rid as waste? So maybe talk a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. So like I mentioned before, hydration is super essential in terms of aftercare. Again, the reason being that we need to make sure that they're appropriately draining and flushing their system. So we tend to recommend at least 1.5 liters of water every single day for the following 2 weeks after the session.
And talk a little bit about the diet.
Yeah, so in terms of diet, obviously we recommend the 2 hours before and after no sugar. Of course, it would be ideal if they could extend that no sugar, at least in terms of ruling out refined sugars. I know it's hard for some people to go to an exclusively carb-free diet sort of right off the bat. So as long as they can limit sugars, some studios have found really effective to recommend keto for 72 hours after, which has been really, really helpful for results. So I would just say the better their diet is, again, the only 2 ways that this session doesn't work, well, I guess there's 3 ways that the session wouldn't work. Is A, if they're not a good candidate for the treatment, which we've discussed a bit before. B is if we're not doing the technique properly, so we're not cooling them down enough. And C would be if they're not maintaining. So again, this isn't a surgical procedure. It's not going to be something similar to a tummy tuck. You will see those results if you invest in yourself, but it's really important that we let the clients know that they do have to make that investment in themselves as well.
Right. And just a little bit more on when you would turn somebody away because they're not a good candidate.
Good question. So if they are obese, we would unfortunately have to turn somebody away. Again, in those circumstances, you could still potentially do a toning facial that would be helpful. Also, a double chin session could be potentially helpful in those situations. But a body slimming just wouldn't really be the right thing for them. If you just think about it in terms of what we're really trying to achieve, there's too many layers of fat that we wouldn't actually be able to address anything. So there would be subtle results there, but just not enough to warrant them spending that money. We wouldn't really see great results for them. So at the end of the day, you guys as practitioners are going to be the authority there. So you really do have to kind of address who's right and who may not be the best candidate.
The question about does keto, create better results? The answer is yes. Let's see, a couple more questions coming at us fast. There's some toning questions we'll get to in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit dumb.
Regarding not treating multiple areas for slimming, if you do multiple areas, what can happen to the client? Asking because Coolsculpting does, as we know, treat multiple areas.
So the reason behind the multiple areas rule, as I mentioned before, is that because they're the fat cells that go through apoptosis, then pass themselves through the lymphatic system as cellular debris. When you're putting too much into the lymphatic system, A, it can overload the kidneys and the liver, which is of course not great for the health of the client. And B, it can actually hinder the results of the session because you're putting too much in the body that the body then can't process out. Right there, I'm gonna measure you. Just like that bit. More. And then what did we say our initial measurement was?
Okay. Oh, I don't know. Does anybody remember from the top of the hour what the initial measurement was?
All right, take a deep breath in. Take a breath out.
39.
So she is at 37. So she just lost 2 inches on the table. So you can see right here, same exact area, 37 inches. There you go, babe. And you can see just in terms of visual appearance, right? We can really start to see the difference. Really, you'll generally see it right in these 2 lower pockets. So we can see there's a little bit of redness there. That'll dissipate for you in a couple of hours max. Also in the belly button, we tend to see that lift. And on the side, just that nice cinching to the side. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Of course.
Great.
Good to go.
The couple more questions.
Yeah.
How do you know if somebody is a good candidate for a double chin?
So that is a great question. It's one that I've been getting really frequently lately. So in terms of a good candidate for a double chin, they have to have, so if we look at the wand, they have to have enough fat to be able to actually push into the wand. And so if they just have loose skin, it's not going to be effective for them, and it's going to be incredibly uncomfortable to do a double chin. And so what we would do instead is we would do the toning facial. So as you guys know, we start the toning facial at the neck, and then we make our way up. And so that actually addresses loose skin here. Whereas the double chin is really more for that real typical prominent double chin.
And just a question
Yes.
on, so specifically for our model, when could she come in next, and what would be the recommendation on where she would focus?
Absolutely. So we would say she can come in next in 2 weeks from today for a slimming. If she wanted to do a toning, we could actually do one today if that was something she was interested in. There's no contraindication between doing slimming and toning in the same day, as long as you're not focusing on the same area. So we could do, for example, slimming on the stomach and then toning on the legs and toning on the face if that's something that they were interested in doing. In terms of recommendations for her, I would say she should come back in 2 weeks for a slimming, and then we would do it on the same area. So that's why I generally recommend, if people are looking to focus on different areas, you go through the full 5-pack with them in one area or until they're resolved in that area. The reason behind that is because if we're kind of going on and off, we have to wait 2 weeks, obviously. It's just going to hinder the results, and we would rather have them have really great results from one area and then be more incentivized to pursue a 5-pack in another area versus just kind of having mediocre results in each area.
Okay, a couple other good questions. There's a hot conversation around BMI and whether or not BMI is effective.
Yes.
If you wanted to talk about that, but another question around the max measurements that you would treat somebody.
Yes, so that's a really good question. It's going to be really hard, again, to have like a real steadfast measurement, just because people, in terms of their height, that's why BMI is a bit more helpful, because it takes into consideration height as well as weight. I would say, yeah, generally, again, 35 is going to be the max in America that we would be able to treat. Obviously, it's something you're just going to have to eyeball. I would say if someone is kind of in the 40-inch range around, we would have to just determine that. But I would say anything under 40 inches generally is going to be okay. But again, really depends on height, really depends on their stature. So it's going to be something you'll have to eyeball for sure.
Okay, great. And there's a question here, and maybe we can use our second model. So somebody says, I tend to miscalculate on how many sessions are necessary. I was confident in a 5, and then I was told that this would probably be a candidate for a 10. Any good rules of thumb?
Got it. So if you were told that it would be a better candidate for a 10, chances are what they meant was that it would be a better candidate for slimming and toning alternatively. So I'll just go through really quick just a couple of situations in which that would be the best course of action. So number 1 would be the Brazilian butt lift, right? So that is the slimming underneath the butt itself, and then toning on the butt to contour it, as well as address cellulite on the butt cheeks. So as you guys know, with slimming, it doesn't tend to really be that effective on the butt itself. It's really best to do right underneath. Toning is great to address cellulite and any kind of loose skin on the butt itself. So in those situations, what we would do is we would start week 1 with slimming, band underneath, week 2 toning, up and contour and on the butt itself, week 3 slimming, alternatively until they see a resolution. And so generally that'll be a 10-pack because it'll be 5 slimmings and 5 tonings. Other situations in which that's really helpful are cellulite on fatty areas. So if they do have cellulite on a fatty area and they're just doing toning, it's not really going to be as effective as it could be if they're doing slimming and toning alternatively. So super heavy cellulite or cellulite on fatty areas, we would recommend doing slimming and toning alternatively, as well as anybody who's undergone a very rapid weight loss, in which case we would also recommend doing slimming and toning alternatively. So on the same area, but again, in that case, generally it's easiest to schedule slimming week 1, toning week 2, slimming week 3, toning week 4, etc.
Did you want to take another client to diagnose them at the beginning, or do you want to?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So let's have you come on over. And let me just get a fresh towel on here for us as well. Yes. All right, perfect. So this is great. So we'll see what our new client is going to be a candidate for. So let me just open it. I'll just squeeze over this side. Oh, okay. Perfect. So angle it down that way. All right, perfect. So yeah, what area were you looking to treat? My belly. Okay, so let's have her hop up on here. So you're gonna hop up just with your head on the pillow there. And we'll just scoot back. So yeah, perfect. Is that okay? That's comfortable for you? All right, awesome. So we'll lift up. We'll pull down. Okay, so same thing. You always want to get them up on the table. She's told me that she wants to do the stomach. And so what we're going to do is the grip test. And so we do the grip test. We see that there is just one kind of grip full of that subcutaneous fat. And so another way of kind of going through this process is this idea of pinch and inch. Also, like thinking of subcutaneous fat as the fluffy fat, right? So this is the fluffy fat. It's the fat that's able to come off of the skin when you pinch it. And so we know that she is a candidate for slimming in this area, but we'll have to measure her to see if we're going to do front only or front and back. So let me just grab my tape measure and we'll do the same thing. Again, it's always going to be the same thing. So we go right around the belly button. Just make sure this is even down here. So right around the belly button. Back. So I'll have you take a deep breath in, deep breath out. So she's actually at 34 inches. So she is in that range where we might be able to do front and back. But basically what I do in this situation is I just take a look at what we're working with. And I would say that she actually is someone that I would want to do front and back. And so the way that I can determine that, again, she's under 35 inches, so she's at 34 inches. But also just in looking at her body type, you can see that The fat that's on the front is very much localized in between her hip bones. So it's not really spilling over so much in this area, which is when I would focus exclusively on the front, but it really is localized in this lower front abdomen. And the back is really localized on the sides. And so in this situation, again, she's 34 inches, and we know that it's very localized here and very localized here. So I know for her, I'm gonna do front and then I'm gonna do back. The way that I'm gonna break this up, it's gonna look different than the last client. So instead of just focusing here, instead we're gonna focus the heat across the whole stomach. Then we're gonna focus 6 minutes of cold here in this small area right here, 6 minutes of cold here, before having her flip over, and then we'll do the other side. So we'll go ahead and get started. So like I said before, it's gonna be the exact same process. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take a wipe and we're gonna just wipe off the surface. And I'm happy to continue to answer any questions because like I said, this is gonna be the same process.
So what we're getting a lot of great questions around toning.
Yeah.
The focus today was really on slimming, but since we have a little bit of time, we'll go ahead into those.
Well, what we could do too, I mean, if you're into it, we could do toning and then later on. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Awesome.
So there's actually specifically more questions around toning around the legs and butt, but that's okay. We can go ahead and do that. So they're asking a couple general questions. Are there any techniques on toning that work really well? And then is it possible to essentially give a butt lift with the toning technique, which I know there is some good answers there.
I have strong feelings about this. Yes, there is. So the toning in general is just amazing, as is the slimming. The toning on the butt is just a great way to naturally contour that area. And so my biggest thing that I go over in all of my trainings is that it is so important that when you're doing a toning on the backs of the legs and the butt, that when you're coming up the butt, that instead of just doing a straight line, that you actually contour. So the reason behind that is that we're not trying to get rid of that shape of the butt, but we're instead trying to enhance it. And so I'll be able to show you guys this as we go on later in the webinar. But it's super important that you're really contouring the shape of the butt, and that when you're treating the cellulite on the butt itself, that you're starting at the base of the butt cheek as opposed to coming up from the leg, which can just, flatten out the butt a little bit.
Okay, great. We'll see if we can get to that. One question I missed, techniques for before and after pictures.
Ooh, really good question. So techniques for before and after pictures. So some of the complaints we've been getting on those are that they're not consistent enough. So I would say consistency is key with before and after. So that is consistency of lighting, consistency of background, as well as consistency of clothing. So consistency of clothing, honestly, is going to be the biggest thing. Also, you want to make sure you're in a well-lit area. So either an area that's lit by natural light, so if you have a big window in your studio, or even if you just set up a little lighting system. Otherwise, it's totally fine to take them with your phone. That's fine. I would recommend just finding somewhere that's well lit, that's not harshly overhead lit, because even the best of us are going to look really bad under that kind of lighting. So we just really want to make sure that we're showcasing the effects of the sessions as much as we can. We're not over editing anything, because that tends to be pretty clearly sort of messed with. I think the more sort of bare we can be with it is going to be the more effective.
Perfect. Couple questions that Simon is doing a good job answering in the chat, but we'll just cover in case people are not able to see the chat. Normatec compression, when to do whole body cryotherapy, some of those recommendations around other treatments.
Yeah, absolutely. So both really, really good questions. I know a lot of the studios that have the CRYOSKIN have multiple modalities, including ours here in New York. In terms of the Normatec you're actually able to use whenever. We recommend doing any of those kind of more drainage techniques 72 hours after a slimming. So the reason why is that it takes about 72 hours for apoptosis to ramp up in the system. And so if you wait for 72 hours, then you would have a better sort of result from that drainage. Having said that, it's totally fine to do compression the next day. It's totally fine to do whole body the next day. Our official stance is it's fine to do whole body the day of. It's just could be like a little intense and sensitive to people who are more sensitive to the cold as well as to warmer climates. We would probably recommend avoiding that, but whole body's fine. In terms of infrared sauna, that's the only one that there are really specific rules with. So for infrared sauna, you want to make sure that they're not doing it before the session and they're not doing it for at least 72 hours after.
Great. Great question coming from Sienna Cryo on techniques for slimming on the legs. Maybe if we have some time, even if we're not actually using the cold treatment, we can show a little bit of the technique around the legs for one of our models.
Absolutely.
So we'll get to that. And then there's a question, and maybe we'll do this in a follow-up, but some more training info on Cellulite. A customer here, Christine Green, is not seeing huge results in that area after sessions.
Okay.
So that could be probably a whole other webinar that we could do on, or if you wanted to jump in with some tips.
Yeah, so some tips that I have, I think that generally when people don't see results with Cellulite, there's a couple reasons why. So number one, it could be that if you aren't already doing slimming and toning alternatively, they might be a candidate for that rather than just the toning. Another thing that's important to note, and really important to let your clients know, is that and you know what? Oh, we did measure you. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. And another thing is that you want to make sure that you let the clients know that they're not going to see immediate results from the toning in the same way that they would from a facial, in the same way that they'll see an inch loss from the slimming. It takes around 3 to 4 days to see the best results from a toning session, and so you do really want to make sure that the clients aren't going in expecting that their cellulite will be gone after 20 minutes.
Great. And a general question here, how do you determine if slimming is okay for the saddlebag area and the upper thigh in general?
Really good question. So a lot of this is, again, going to have to come from the grip test because generally the backs of the legs are going to be a more muscular area and therefore potentially better for toning rather than slimming. If someone does have pinchable fat in that area, then the slimming would be effective. If not, though, the toning is great to just kind of smooth the saddlebag area over.
And about how long does the toning results last?
So generally, again, we always recommend a sequence of 5. So once they've done a sequence of 5 of toning, generally those results will last. Again, this is really going to depend on age as well as genetics because it is a more superficial skin surface level session. But after the 5 sessions, generally those results will last anywhere from 2 to 3 months.
Great. And if a client has fibroids, can you do the session on them? On their stomach?
On their stomach. That is a good question. I would have to follow up on that one.
If a client has metal in their hip but wants stomach slimming, can it still be done if we avoid that area?
I think that as long as that area is avoided, we had a question about the pacemaker as well, but just as long as you are really avoiding that area, shouldn't be an issue because we're not actually reaching a visceral level of the body, so it's not actually going to be able to affect anything like that. Again, as long as you're being very careful, because you can see that I am fairly close to this area.
A question from Rolanda that I'm interested in the answer on myself. Can you concentrate on knee areas with slimming for chubby knees? I had a shocking picture from the weekend. I am very interested in chubby knees.
No, absolutely. So in that case, I would definitely recommend that you just focus the band right above the knee to make sure it's the most effective. It's going to be very similar in technique to what you would do on the arms as well as the upper thighs in the on the back side. But yeah, absolutely. But again, it's super important to make sure that you definitely grip test them if they do have chubby knees versus just knees that need a little bit of toning.
Right. And I'm going to do one other there, kind of around the same area on contraindications. What about C-section? Again, first one. Nicholas asks it. What does it produce results for women and just generally on C-section? And then I'll get to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely anytime you're doing a slimming, you do want to avoid the area of a scar. You don't want to slim over a scar because it can definitely just, even if it's a healed scar, there's just, you know, scar tissue and there's that kind of issue there. But you can slim around that area, and then we've actually seen good results from that. Also, toning is helpful in any kind of scar areas, as long as there's no open wounds and as long as it's still healed.
Generally with moms, we do see great results though. So as long as you're avoiding that, that's where we see, that's why we kind of laser target on a lot of moms.
Absolutely.
Good for models today being okay. Doing a facial toning session, Delaney, to get rid of crow's feet, would you just go over the same area multiple times or go over the area very slow or both?
So what I would recommend for crow's feet, I mean, honestly, it's going to be addressed regardless of the technique. I do recommend that you really stick to that one stroke per pass of the face. But to get to the crow's feet, you do want to make sure that when you're coming from the center of the forehead, you come off to the side and make sure that you are getting that stroke right by the eye. And a good helpful tip actually when you're doing just their front on the 14-minute path is you can actually use your thumb over their side to really balance and get that tension. So it's actually really helpful to do it this way.
Just to let you guys know, we know we're a little bit over time. Simon will be sending out this webinar, so if you need to jump and want to watch the last little bit, that's totally fine. We appreciate you guys joining. We will just continue on a little bit for those extra questions. Okay, we have more. Would you be able to demo slimming, toning of the thigh, butt, or would it have to be during the next webinar, and when will that be? I think we could. We'll do it without the temperature on one of the models, but maybe we'll do a follow-up as well with a little bit more time spent on it, but we'll touch on it today so that you can actually see it. Okay. Also, I would love to see a great technique for the arms with slimming. Any recommendations, or do you do the same technique as the stomach?
So for the arms, it's going to be, for all the slimmings really, it's a very similar technique, but it's just applied slightly differently. So you always want to make sure you're moving your arms together to meet. So always moving your hands towards one another, always staying to a localized area. But in the arms, it's going to be a little bit different because instead of going parallel up and down like you are on the stomach, you're going to be doing from side to side, so where the fat is localized. So you always have to adjust your technique slightly for where the fat is really localized on the client. So we'll go over that again, like Molly said. We'll do it with the wand off at the end of the webinar, and we can follow up on that as well.
And there are good webinar videos in the Google Drives that Simon's put a link to in the chat on arms specifically. Not as much on legs, so we'll try and hit on that a little bit here. Okay, can CRYOSKIN help with unsuccessful liposuction? The area looks swollen. The procedure was done in November 2017.
Good question. So that's been 6 months, so then you would definitely be able to treat that area. I can't say for sure whether it would be, it would be effective for any fat remaining. It just depends on what the botched element was of that session. Obviously, if it's some kind of surgical error, it's just going to depend on the situation.
Great, I think. Okay, with facial toning, can you do it after all therapy, since, okay, all therapy is spelled U-L-T, alt therapy.
Is that the light?
Since alt therapy is for lifting and tightening the skin. Maybe Rolanda, you could clarify in the chat what if that's the light therapy.
Not familiar with the particular technology, so I'd probably have to check on it.
Lighting for anti.
Oh, in that case, it should be totally fine. Yeah, it should be fine to do.
And alt therapy is an ultrasound from Rolanda.
I'm not sure about that.
Check on that one.
We have to check on that one, yeah.
Megan, no worries. Good to get answers on both. Okay, can cryotoning and light stim be combined for cellulite treatment?
Light stem is the LED, right? The red light. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, there's no reason, as long as it's not something invasive, there shouldn't be any contraindications other than what we already mentioned, like the infrared sauna. So anything that's heating them, we probably would want to avoid, but anything else that's not invasive should be totally fine to be combined with the session.
Can they be done on the same day?
I can't see why there would be a contraindication there.
Right. Delaney, could we do a leg look before we do the other
sure.
side, or is that going to be
It's fine.
Okay. So we'll just do a quick look on legs. Did you want model 1 or model 2 for that?
It's either way. I think probably model 1 because she's got shorts on. It's a little bit easier. You're perfect, darling. You can keep the towel if you want, and then we'll have you just pop up real quick. Yeah. All right, perfect, darling. So what I'll probably have you do, and let me make sure that we're angled at the right angle. You know what? We might have you flip over so that your head's on this side. Is that okay? Yep. And then if you can scoot down just a tiniest bit. Okay, perfect. So in terms of the legs, so again, we're just going to show you, we're not going to actually turn the machine on, but what we would do is generally I'd have the clients just extend their legs a little bit out this way. Perfect. And then what you would do is you would have them, ideally they'd be wearing their underwear. You could put them in a robe or just cover them with a towel so that this would be a little bit higher. But just for our purposes today, I'm just going to put some gel on her real quick so I can show you guys. And so essentially you would do the heating the same way. Again, deposit and glide. You'd be coming up a little higher, but because we're limited in what we can show you right now, we can just do it this way. So a lot of the inner thigh is really just going to be localized very high. So you do want to make sure that they are either, again, in their underwear, in a robe, or having a towel on them so that you can really reach comfortably up to that area. And so you would heat up, again, just like this. In terms of when the cold sequence would come on, it would be this kind of manipulation, right? So you're using the natural curve of their body to lift and squeeze. So it really is that kind of ice cream, that hard ice cream scooping effect.
Delaney, do you find that this can be more uncomfortable for clients, and how do you advise them to let you know on that? So I know in the one session I saw that people, it felt a little funkier.
Absolutely. So definitely the inner thigh is going to be a sensitive area. The way I would just frame it and the way I would kind of approach that is just to be really sure that you are constantly gauging their comfortability, making sure that they feel okay, making sure that they know also, kind of frame the area to them. So kind of take a look at the area and say, okay, we're really going to be focusing right up here. Is that going to be okay? Like, how are you, just really just checking in with them, I think is the best. Generally, when a client's coming in for inner thigh slimming, they kind of know, I think already, that we're going to have to get kind of close close. But I would say in these situations, it's really essential to have a female practitioner doing the sessions. But other than that, it's really just about gauging their comfortability. All right, perfect. So that would be how you would do it. Same way on the other leg, so we just have them flip over.
Question on positioning for the legs. A couple good questions. So would you ever, like positioning them, would you ever butterfly the legs for better ease of access?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, you definitely can. The only thing that I would recommend probably against that would be that it tends to make the fat displace itself. So it actually, it's not as easy. So generally you want them to really have their legs flat to the table so that then you can use the wand to reach under and lift up as opposed to having to do it more on the side end.
Great. And another follow-up question on the legs.
Yeah.
What about the outer thigh?
So for the outer thighs, depending on their size, generally that is more of a toning area. Again, it really just does depend, but I can kind of show you guys here really quickly. If you did have enough to grip, which our model does not, what we would do is we would do it the same exact way, but just from the outer edge. Yeah, so same exact technique as you would for the inner thigh, but just from the outer edge here.
But she doesn't have enough to pinch.
But she doesn't. So
okay.
You can see this is all muscle here. So this isn't there's no subcutaneous fat on her here. It's all muscle, so I can't grip anything. So what we would do instead for her, if she was concerned about this area, we would tone it. So what we would do is tone it. And just to show you guys actually now that we have her laying here, your question on toning earlier, just briefly, in terms of toning the butt, super important. So the toning technique, again, as you guys know, it's very simple. It's tap, tap, and then lift. So either you lift leading with your hand or you lift following with your hand. So you can go tap, tap, lift, and then you contour the butt, right? So instead of going up and over that way, just think of it as we always want to contour the butt. So we're always contouring. And then when you're doing the actual cheek itself, tap, tap, lift, tap, tap, lift, tap, tap, lift, tap, tap, lift.
Question, why the tap, tap?
Yeah, so the tapping just is, it helps to promote elasticity in the skin. It also helps to break up that more superficial layer of cellulite. So it's really just, again, mostly promoting that elasticity. Correct. So what we'll do is I'm actually going to steal this towel out from under you, babe, and I'm going to tuck it into your waistband again. And so same thing on this side for her, because we decided to do front and back. We're going to focus on the full back, and we're going to do the back. You're never really ever here, right? So we're only ever going to be here and on the side. And she's got a bit of a scar here, so that's good training as well. We're going to make sure to avoid that. And so when we're on the sides, we do really want to just focus right in that small area. So you can see how localized that area is. And the same thing on this side. Also, when you're heating, you do want to make sure you're actually heating the side area.
Couple more toning questions as you get started there. What's the ideal pressure for toning, and what temperature are you looking to get to with the toning?
That's a really good question. So ideal temperature for the toning is going to be anything under 2 degrees. Because with the toning you are lifting off, it is going to be different than something like the slimming where you're going to get into the negatives. -2 is the ideal temperature for toning, but generally you're probably going to be in like the 4 to 2 range, which that's fine. That'll still be effective. It's more so the constriction from the wand, the dilation from your hand, that vasoconstriction is more what's giving you the effectiveness as opposed to the actual area getting down to that cooling effect.
And the pressure, did you
pressure. Sorry about that.
No?
So yeah, so pressure-wise, it's going to be somewhere between the facial and the slimming. So you can see it's more of like that lifting pressure. So you can see here, right? If I was going to do a toning here, it's kind of this pressure, right? And you're applying pressure with your hands as they follow. So it's not a really strong pressure, and you're going much faster than you do on the slimming. So it's really like about that speed.
Right. And we're just going to start this session. Again, this is kind of bonus round. If anybody needs to jump off, no worries. Can you tell me the treatment again for the Brazilian butt lift? Slimming under the butt, but then contouring toning session on back, go legs, around butt. Would that be a $700 service?
So you wouldn't do that in the same sitting. The reason is that you're going to overlap areas. And so what we would do for a Brazilian butt lift, it's a great opportunity for a package. So what you would do is you could sell a 10-pack for that. You would start with slimming. So you start with slimming right underneath the band, right under the butt, so the top of the thighs. And then you would do toning on the area from the backs of the legs up into the butt.
Can you do toning of the back of the leg and the butt together?
You can, but the only thing I would say in that is that I would recommend that if they want to do the backs of the thighs from the knees up, that you wouldn't include the butt cheeks in that, because it's just not going to be enough time to really get both areas. So I would generally split them up into two, but you can get the tops of the thighs and the butt cheeks in one session, and we can show you guys that at a later date.
The question that Delaney was answering was whether or not you can do the legs and the butt together. Is that the question you had, Rolanda? Okay. Is it okay to do cryotherapy before sessions?
That's a good question.
We have athletes, the reason is we have athletes that run very warm and you can't get them down.
Yeah, in that case, I would say that that would be fine. I would still recommend that they do it probably at least an hour before the session. Reason being that obviously with the heat component, that's important as well for the beginning of the session. And so you don't want to have them be too cold that the 2 minutes of heat won't be able to expand the fat cells and bring them to the surface. So definitely good to incorporate, but I would say again, yeah, just making sure that they're back to a normal temperature before you get started.
Okay, Rolanda's question was repeat the banana roll, then toning the buttocks.
Banana?
Sorry, not sure. Sorry, Rolanda, might need to follow up on that one. Not sure. On the question of when we can demonstrate the Brazilian butt lift, or just basically the toning around that area, do we have a video of that one, Delaney?
I don't think so.
Yeah, we'll have to either follow up in a webinar. Give us like a week or two on that piece. Oh. Banana roll is the fat under the butt cheek. I was unaware of that.
Oh, I didn't know that either. It's good to know.
Teaching us things. Appreciate it. Any other questions, Delaney? Do you want to run through some of the top things we see, the adding the gel, the pimple pop?
Yeah, absolutely. So the top things that we see people struggle with, especially first starting out, are going to be cooling down the wand to the target temperature. It's also going to be determining areas, which we've talked about a little bit, and just technique stuff. So really, my biggest recommendations for you guys is to just like really watch and rewatch those training videos and just practice as much as you can. So generally we say that after you do a formal training with us, we still recommend that each of your staff members perform 3 of each session on a non-paying client before you roll out to paying clients. And the reason behind that is because, as you guys can see, even though this technique looks really easy, it's actually much harder than it looks. And so we really do want to make sure that we're getting the most effective results. So right now I'm actually at -6. So that's really great for this area. So yeah, again, the histogram is going to be just the most important thing for you guys. It's such a great tool to really check if you're going to get effective results.
2 more questions. What do you use to sanitize the wand?
Super good question. So in between sessions, generally what I'll do is I'll just use a baby wipe to wipe off the surface of the head. Reason being is that because we're using gel, we're never actually touching a client's skin. So there's no kind of sanitation issues there. But also at the end of the night, what I'll use is a non-alcohol cleaning wipe of some kind. So there are some Clorox and Lysol wipes that don't contain alcohol, in which case I would recommend doing that at the end of the night. In between clients, I tend to not like to do that just because in case I'm doing it on their face, it can become quite irritating. So we do just want to make sure that we're keeping that in mind.
Okay, does anyone have any recommendations for cellulite cream you can massage with after the treatment? You probably want to make sure you mention not to have any things on the surface.
Yes.
And then we probably wouldn't recommend one, but go for it.
Yeah, so
in the chat.
yeah, so I recommend, again, yeah, you always want to make sure they have nothing on their skin before you get started. But afterwards, obviously, it's kind of up to you guys what you want to use. Just make sure it's something that doesn't have too many active ingredients, as the skin can be quite sensitive and a little bit, obviously with the cold, it's a little bit red already. So you just kind of want to make sure that you're not enhancing that sensitivity.
All right, so take any other questions as we're wrapping up here. As a note, I'm taking that there is interested in a butt lift webinar. Maybe we'll do that around, that would have been good to do around the World Cup, but if there's any other, if you guys want to put in the chat, if there's any other kind of follow-up ones, let us know. You prefer to use, why do you prefer to not use gloves for the knees?
So I prefer not to use gloves because there's a few different reasons. So I find them really difficult to use because so much of this session is about getting that friction and the pressure. So if you're using gloves, they're going to slide, but also for some of the other sessions, they're really contingent on the body temperature emanating from your hand. And if you have a glove, it may not have that same temperature.
I think I'm caught up on questions. Ping me if I'm not, if I missed your question in the chat. If you don't have access to the chat, you can raise your hand and I would unmute.
So now I'm at 6 minutes, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop the machine before I set the wand down so I make sure it's not still cooling. And then what I'll have you do that, I'll just have you flip over to the other side. So we're operating in small quarters here, so generally it would be nice if you have the machine on a cart that you can move around them to avoid having them have to do this. But if you do have a tight space, it's not an issue. Generally clients are kind of happy to switch over.
I'm going to mention anything about the scar to make sure you're...
Yes, so once I get into the scar area, so you guys can see, just switch these over. So her scar is located at an angle right here. So when I'm working in this area, I'm just going to really make sure that I'm not coming over it, I'm not tugging too much in that actual scar area, but I'm really focusing over here. And because it's not actually in my treatment area, it shouldn't really be that much of an issue, but you do want to really just be mindful of that. So what we'll do again, let's what I'll have you do is just scoot a little bit further down on the table if you can. Perfect. Amazing. Sorry, again, those quarters. And so you can see I'm actually using my thumb to kind of protect the scar so that I don't even come close.
Okay. Has anybody had an issue when pausing the 40-minute program and when you restart, it goes back to heating instead of back to cold? Have you got that, Delaney?
Oh, sorry, that was the question. Yeah, we haven't had that issue, but if you guys do have that issue, let George know and we can sort that out from there. We have another question.
General request to do facial toning and another webinar.
Oh,
Which
okay.
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Specific technique with the Nike swoosh, a much faster movement. Another question on scars.
Mhm.
Do you avoid scars for slimming and toning or just slimming?
Just for slimming. So the reason behind avoiding it for slimming is because the manual manipulation is so much more intense. We just want to avoid tugging and pulling on any kind of scar area. But actually for the toning, it can help to bring some circulation to that area. So it's great for like healing and also just like reducing overall appearance. Two minutes. And then what was her measurement before? Was 34?
finally, at the end of the session, do you talk to clients about what they should do after?
Absolutely. Yeah, so at the end of each session, I always will go over aftercare with them. So just making sure they feel comfortable about the diet as well as how much water they have to be drinking. And also next steps. So really like set them up to know exactly what they need to do next. Generally, I'll try to even book people's sessions for the next visit. So that just helps them to feel like they're on track, like they know what to expect. And I think it's just really nice to build that rapport with them. I'm doing the massage for about 60 to 90 seconds. So this is a really essential component. So please, please, please do not forget to do this. Again, if you just think about the slimming as a 3-phase thermal shock, it's really easy to remember. It's heat, cold, heat. So heat with the wand, cold with the wand, heat with your hands, and then you're done. So now what I'll do again, I'm just gonna wipe off that excess gel for her. Perfect. And I'll have her flip back over onto her back so we can measure her again and just see how we did. And just another quick training thing, I just want to remind everyone that you can hear now the fan is going on the CRYOSKIN. Please don't turn it off until the fan has run its course. It's just helping the machine not to overheat, so you just want to make sure that you let it keep going. Awesome, and I'll just have you extend your legs back as well. Yep, 33, so we lost an inch. Awesome. All right, amazing, you guys. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for joining today. Wonderful session, great questions and great engagement. We'll be sending this out to everyone, and thanks for the follow-up ideas for future webinars. Have a good day.